I had to remove a slide, so everything, the most important thing was in the slide that I've removed, so I apologize for that. I'm kidding. So we are toward the end, not yet. And just as a brief introduction, these are the current project that my team is involved in. The first three are mainly European projects. The first two are training networks, so training Marie Curie students. And they are all, you see, dealing with the topic of personalization in robotics and how to make behavior more transparent and legible. We have a fourth one that I'm not going to talk about it today, which is kind of famous because it finished also on Saturday Night Live. And it's still about personalization, but a different type of interaction. Here we continuing with the idea of having somehow robots that help with the elderly assistance. And in particular, we are interested in two types of assistance that could be provided. One, it's more on monitoring the behavior of user in their own private environment. Of course, here again, it's more like putting a robot helping the elderly, but also and especially the caregiver in their tasks, daily tasks. And for example, when I was traveling here, I was seated by a very old lady and his daughter, and they were moving to Switzerland, and the old lady was like every 5 minutes asking the same question to the daughter. She was extremely nice, so she was always replying, I already told you, we are going to move to Geneva, we are going to live there. But of course, she's still keeping on asking the same question, and at the end, she was like a little bit upset, still very kind. Mama, I'm not going to reply to you anymore. You know the fact, but indeed, she don't know. So that's one of the typical role where the robot do not lose any patience, so it's still there, and it can keep going on with this kind of question ever and ever. And also we are working a little bit in a different kind of setting, so with children, and we'll see a few slides at the end of the presentation. So we, of course, as dealing with personalization, first of all, we have to start from who are the people that are going to use the robot, and people we intend not only the elderly, but also caregivers and doctors, all the persons involved in the care assistance. But we are also interested on understanding what in the robot behavior can be personalized and how to achieve this personalization. So in order to do that, the main idea is that we have a lot of information. So in a perfect building, we have a lot of sensors, we have everything together, so we can take a lot of data, we know what's going on in the houses. So that's the dream of a computer scientist, typically. But then we have the reality of a person living in Naples, so reality is different. So we have really houses where there is nothing, not even Wi-Fi sometimes, and we have a lot of furniture, very narrow passages, so we have a very complex situation, and we cannot imagine to go there and start like putting things on the wall, sensors, whatever. So it's not feasible. It's not feasible for experimentation. It's too invasive. So in this sense, having just a robot and using the robot as an active sensor could help if we manage to keep the robot in autonomous way in the houses. So the story I'm going to tell you today is a story actually of a national project, so without money. I think that the budget of my team was around 100,000 euro, that's it. So a lot of commitment, a lot of effort of people, but at the end we got a lot of very good results. And our idea was to develop these robots and active sensors in order to monitor the activity of daily living of persons. And we would like to have the behavior of the robot adapted in order to feel less discomfort as possible to the users, to the patients. And of course, since the robot is alone, so you have to move around, have to look for the person, mainly of the adaptation we provide was about the proxemics, so the behavior, the movement of the robot in the space. So in the project, we had like these three phases of development and testing, because of course we started first with all the development and testing within the lab. So typically we have a lot of, let's say, not elderly without any cognitive disease user coming to the lab and interacting with the robots. Stay in the lab for hours, and we start with the first testing with that. And then in the second phase, typically we have like patients coming to the lab. So we have like small number of the real end user of the robots staying in the lab in the same setting. And then we have like the 2.5 phases, I would say, where I test the robot with my parents. And then we have the real final experimentation with patients in their own private houses. So we start with the first testing. Of course, we thought, okay, let's start, of course, from the needs of the users. And since we are developing tools that are monitoring tools, so they are really not useful for the users because they just a robot that watch them and then leave. So they say, what I have to do with that? Of course, we had to design a lot of additional activities like reminders or entertainment or something else to make them perceive the role of the robot more engaging and more active. And so we started, okay, we don't want the robot to be like working all the time, so we have to understand what are the moment during the day where it's more relevant for the robot to go around. So we started from the routine of the person. Typically, elderly people have a very fixed routine pattern. They do the same things almost at the same times. So we thought, okay, let's start from this information, and patient for patient, let's understand what are the activities that are more relevant. So in that, we had the help of doctors. I said, okay, for this patient, we can select these 6 or 7 activities, and we will have the robots moving in these time frames during the day. And we also start from a lot of requirements, and one of these requirements were also, for example, to try, as I told you before, not to have very heavy structural intervention in the houses, and we would like to have very easy deployment. So we are computer scientists, so that's our job. And so we also would like to test with affordable hardware and to try to take everything into account, like the possible physical, but also cognitive and emotional interaction with the robot. So to understand what we can adapt in this kind of application, we can, of course, think about that we can have an adaptation on what the robot will do. So we can adapt the tasks. We can adapt what the robot have to do with respect to the habits of the person, but also the need of a person. So a person that have, for example, a low memory may need more frequent reminder, another may need from additional activities, another which is more alone probably will need more cognitive stimulation and entertainment. So what the robot can do could be adapted, of course, to the person. But we were also interested a lot on also non-functional adaptation. So non-functional adaptation for me is not what the robot will do, but mainly how to do a thing. So there will be different ways to do the same things, also with different hardware, for example. So it's important not only to accomplish a task, but also do the same task in a way that is acceptable and believable by the user. So that's very important, in our opinion, for the acceptance of the device itself. And so we defined our, let's say, assistive task in terms of something that is called quality of service in computer science. It means I have a task, and I can define the task with different attributes. And for example, attributes may be related to the intrusiveness, the reliability of the algorithm, or for example, how I can modulate the proxemics of the robots or the speed of movement. So I can, let's say, associate this kind of parameters to all the tasks that the robot can achieve, and then modulate from time to time with respect to a specific user, how its behavior will evolve. For example, if I have different way to do the same thing, for example, monitoring the health state of a user, and I could do it, for example, using wearable devices, using the robot, or using, for example, dialogue, so asking directly, how do you feel? I can associate with different quality of service to this different service that at the end have the same function, check the health state of the user, and also select the one that is more appropriate with respect to the specific user or the specific condition, current condition. But then I can have also adaptation in other more subtle parameters of the interaction. For example, I can have adaptation in movements. And so we want to understand what can be adapted in robot behavior and what are the features that are relevant for that adaptation, so what I have to perceive in order to correctly adapt. And also, since we want to deploy this robot in houses, to understand if this kind of adaptation could be achieved on the fly. And of course, since, as I told you, the robot was aimed to stay in the houses for a long time, and from time to time start moving, looking for the person, monitoring the person, or interacting with the person, we thought, okay, let's first try to adapt the proxemics, how the robot moves in the space. And of course, when you deal with human-robot proxemics, there are a lot of things that depends, of course, on the robot. So the shape of the robot impacts a lot on how the distances and the trajectory are perceived by the user. But there are also things that are of the user itself that may affect how I perceive the robot moving around. So we start from, okay, let's consider, first of all, the personality traits of the user, because something that we already know, because they are patients, so they are screened and modeled by their doctors. And also because actually people that have cognitive disease and Alzheimer, they tend to change their personality towards very predefined pattern of value. So at the end, we will have that they will develop a high neuroticism and other peculiar characteristics in their personality. So we started with that, and of course we recognize that neuroticism, for example, and openness are traits that influence how we perceive the robot and its movement around the patient. But it's not just like that, because it could be also the case that what I'm doing affects how I perceive the robot. So if I'm sitting, or if I'm lying, for example, or if I'm standing, or if I'm walking, then I prefer to have different distances to interact or to stay around the robot. So also the pose that I have impacts on how I perceive the robot near me. But at the end, it's not just like that, because it's not the fact that I'm standing. I could be talking to you, or I'm standing since I'm cooking. So it's also what I'm doing that impacts on how the robot should behave. Because if the robot is just monitoring, then could be less of impact. But if the robot has to interact with me, then I don't want, for example, if I'm seated and I'm watching TV, I don't want the robot in front of me asking me things. So I would like somehow the robot to be able to adapt on what I'm doing and modulate its trajectory and its way to interact with me with respect to what I am doing indeed. And so we started, as I told you, with in-lab experiment. We had a lot of people coming there, and we left them in the lab alone, doing their own stuff. And we had the robot moving around in order to make a data set and be able to recognize typically a pattern of interaction that people may have in their home house, for example, cooking or relaxing, talking, ironing in case of ladies, for example. And then we discovered that also considering this kind of pattern of interaction, the perception on distances may change. And also how much the person is distracted by the presence of the robot may change. And for example, why the ladies are ironing, even though it's could be could look like a very complex task. For women, it's very trivial, so they just iron without thinking to something else. So if the robots stand by and start to interact, for them it's quite okay, it's fine. But if I'm working on computer or if I'm watching TV, then the presence of robot could be more annoying. So I have to modulate better the trajectory and distances to interact and monitor them. And at the end, we realized that even though the robot is moving, so its perception can change, still, with very simple reactive geometric equation, we can have that this trajectory are computed online. So the robot will start moving, will start searching for the user, and then once the user is in its field of view, it will start recognizing the activity and then adapting on the fly with respect to what is perceiving. And this kind of things is very easy, so it can be deployed on paper, but also with very simple robot. I have like a Turtlebot there with a simple computer and a Kinect. And still, even has less degrees of freedom, it's possible to compute the right trajectory and to approach the user in the appropriate way. So sometimes it's not a matter of computational power, but it's just a matter to recognize what are the features of the environment, and in this case of the user, that are relevant for the application. And also because, as I told you before, the movements of the robots around are distracting for the user. So there is, of course, a lot of literature in human-robot interaction dealing with the evaluation of the engagement, so how much a user is engaged in interaction, while we were most interested in evaluating the distraction. And so the distraction is this absence of some cues. So it's challenges to evaluate distraction. And also, while in face-to-face human-robot interaction, you have very nice data set with the face of the person just in front of the camera. If you want to evaluate distraction, then you may have the user not even in your field of view. So it could be more challenging, and you have a limited time of a limited period when you are able to see the user, and then you have to rely on the few data that you have at the very last of the approaching sequence. So we try to, for example, evaluate if starting from the common cues used for evaluating engagement, we can also evaluate distraction. So we, for example, considered gazes or change of body posture, or the duration of time, the frequency of gazes as index also of distraction. And we compared the very limited in time view of the robot with respect to external camera, so a manual notation that can be done with a better view. And we found that there were some very strong correlation between these two data. This means that also at the very end of the interaction, I can have a lot of information about how much the behavior of the robot is distracting the user. And so we closed the loop at the end, and we say, okay, we will modulate the behavior with respect to the personality, with respect to the pose, with respect to the action, but we also will try to have this online information on distraction to also modulate, like with the reinforcement learning approach, all the path. So, among other things, that was something that we developed in the lab and we tested in the lab. And then we developed all the applications, so also with all the kind of service that could be provided to the user. And we started to evaluate with the real user in the lab. And here again, you find that you develop things, but sometimes they want other things. For example, there was this lady that was refusing like any suggestion from the robot. Do you want to play a game? No. Do you want to see a video? No. Do you want? So every time the robot was asking something, she just said no. At the end, she wanted only to talk. So the robot started saying, okay, let's talk. And she was talking like for half an hour bad about his daughter, that he was treating her not well, without any feedback from the robot. But for her, it was just enough to talk with the robot and like alleviate the stress. So we got additional data with the real user in the lab. We modified our approach. Of course, we also got a lot of different information for example, setting all the timers that we had to use for the robot, the frequency of the interaction, because, for example, when you have to provide a reminder, you have to provide with like every 10 minutes if the reminder was not accepted and something like that. At the end, we had this very complex mechanism, but flexible in order to easily adapt to the user, to the tasks, and the specific condition of each patient. So after 2 years of development, we got right before the start of pandemic, so we were right on time, to test the system in private houses. So at the beginning of the project, we started with 40 patients that were enrolled for the experimentation. At the end, we got 7. Why we lost a lot of patients during the process? Many reasons. Of course, some of them were just have bad condition, health condition, so their mental state will decrease, and so was not able to have the robot anymore. Then we have problem, as I told you, of houses without Wi-Fi or glasses or cats or dogs or carpets or whatever. So at the end, out of 40, we were able to experiment the robot with 7 patients. But the 7 patients had the robot, each of them for 1 month. And the robot was totally autonomous, so we went there, we stayed with there like half a day and explained everything, what the robot would do, how he will behave, and then we left. And of course, they had the possibility to call us, to ask information and explanation, but everything was completely autonomous. If something was wrong, they have just to reboot the system and everything was starting again. And we have different age of person with very different degree of education and different condition from Alzheimer's to subjective memory impairment and stuff like that. And also very different familiarity, initial familiarity with technology. And after 1 month, of course, I say it's a pity, but it's what we have to do. We're not allowed to have any log, any data, because of course they were in private houses and the robot had a camera. And so we were not able to record anything. So the only thing that we had is what we gave them like emoticon with faces, and they had to mark after each day how the robot would behave. It's like 3 faces because it should not be too complex with people with Alzheimer's. And for example, that's the average results we had after the first line after a month. Like you say, in many of the cases, we have very high results, except for one that have 1, and the other one and 1.5, so in the average. And also we had some testing, and we have standard testing like usability, the UTAUT in this case. But so there are a lot of data that are in paper, but I want you to focus on the values that are there, and in particular on patient 4 and patient 7, because if I go back, you say the patient 4 and patient 7 are actually the one with high familiarity with technology. So we have person that have only like the terza elementare in Italian, so the very low school, and they were totally happy, totally fine with the interaction. At the end, they asked when I can have it back, because they all felt somehow engaged, and they also felt useful, because they always told me, okay, it's like I have to do something during the day, I have to take care of Tamagotchi. So it's a virtual Tamagotchi, a real Tamagotchi that they have to take care of. Instead, the one with high familiarity, one of that was indeed a software analyst too, they wanted to have more. They were expecting more, they were expecting to have very natural language interaction. They were used to have Alexa, so why I cannot talk with the robot as I talk with Alexa? And I was explaining, okay, the Alexa is online, it's taking your data, I cannot do that, so you cannot talk with the robot as with Alexa, but that was not enough for their rating. But in the end, after a month, no one got killed, no one fall down on the robot, so we were quite relieved, and we had very good results. The last things I want to mention before closing, I'm almost there, is some other kind of experimentation in adaptation, this time in social adaptation, that we are doing using a robot in hospital. Because the role of a robot with children, it's evident, so it's like something that is really engaging for children. So whenever they have to wait in hospital, they have to receive medication, why don't make this experience less stressful and less joyful? So we thought, okay, let's have this robot deployed in hospital, and let's try to understand if we can somehow relieve the anxiety state of the children. And first of all, we had this very difficult decision because, of course, with low level of anxiety, it's easy. The robot itself, it's engaging. But when we have children with a very high level of anxiety, then it's tough. Even the parents are not able sometimes to distract the children. So we first try to understand if, for example, having the robot showing different emotions, sometimes also negative emotion, could trigger the attention of the children for a while in order to catch it and keep the interaction. And so we had this first experiment in a vaccination center. Of course, vaccination is not stressful, but still could be a bad experience for a child. And we had the robots that performed a lot of typical distraction techniques deployed by the nurses, like blowing or singing or whatever, and with different emotions that were tuned with respect to initial anxiety of the child. And of course, we had a lot of impact of significant differences, but in this case, of course, we didn't have many children with a high level of anxiety because the settings was friendly enough not to put them in a high anxiety state. But still, we had cases in which the child did not realize at all the injection, so they were there just enjoying, and for the nurse, everything was easy. So they were really happy that somehow their job was helped by the presence of the robot. But we had this evaluation with questionnaires, and the questionnaires were given to the parents. So we thought, okay, let's try to have more objective measurement of this kind of things. So we had another experiment, this time in ER. And we, of course, consider only the cases that are green or yellow, so the one that have to wait a lot in order to be visited by doctor. And we had two groups this time, one with the children that stay with their parents, one with the children that stay with the robots, and the third one, the children that stayed with the psychologist. And we measured the salival cortisol from the salivation in order to understand the level of stress before, during, and after the interaction. And in this case, it was again that the robot provided a lot of relief to the children, and especially with girls. We don't have an explanation for that, but for the girls were a very decrease in cortisol level during and after the interaction. Surprisingly, the worst case was the one with the psychologist. It's not surprisingly, actually, but we thought that of course, children see the white dress, and they cannot really differentiate among a doctor or a psychologist, so the C of the dress would put them in a higher anxiety state with respect to their parents. Still, we are still keeping on doing this kind of experimentation. Of course, now we can start again because, of course, during pandemic, we had to stop for many reasons, but we will keep investigating also on that. That's it. Thank you.